The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Spokane, Washington Territory, 1873, as Pearl Dawson ran for her life. Her heart pounded wildly against her ribs, skirts gathered in one hand, the other clutching a damning piece of paper that could save her brother's life if she lived long enough to present it. "Stop that woman," Sheriff Harmon's voice boomed behind her, but Pearl didn't slow. Freedom lay ahead, just beyond the weathered courthouse where her brother was being sentenced for a crime he didn't commit. Bursting through the heavy oak doors, Pearl found herself facing a crowded courtroom, all eyes turning toward her disheveled appearance. At the front stood Judge Montgomery, his gavel frozen mid-air as she interrupted the proceedings. "Your Honor," she gasped, fighting to catch her breath. "I have evidence that proves my brother's innocence." Judge Montgomery's face darkened with fury. "Miss Dawson, this court has already determined your brother's guilt. Your interruption is contempt of court." Pearl straightened her spine, her blue eyes flashing with determination as she strode forward. "Then I stand in contempt, Your Honor, because I will not allow an innocent man to hang for something he did not do." From the back of the courtroom, Wyatt Evans watched with growing interest. He'd ridden into Spokane just 2 days prior, looking for work at one of the local ranches. Now he found himself witnessing something extraordinary: a woman standing against the entire justice system with nothing but courage and conviction. Judge Montgomery's face reddened with anger. "Miss Dawson, you are trying my patience. Remove yourself from my courtroom immediately or face arrest." "I will not," Pearl declared, her voice unwavering as she held up the telegram. "This message proves that my brother Thomas was 30 miles away in Colville when Mr. Finch was robbed. It's signed by the telegraph operator himself." "Bailiff," the judge barked, "remove this woman and place her under arrest for contempt of court." As 2 bailiffs moved toward Pearl, Wyatt felt his feet moving before his mind caught up with his actions. He stepped into the aisle, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. "Your Honor," he called out, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Shouldn't the court at least examine the evidence?" The judge's cold eyes turned to Wyatt. "And who might you be, sir?" "Wyatt Evans, Your Honor, just arrived from Montana Territory." He removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "I don't know this woman or her brother, but if there's evidence to be considered, isn't that the purpose of this court?" Pearl stared at the stranger with the sun-bronzed face and kind eyes, hardly believing someone had come to her defense. The telegram trembled in her hand as the judge's gaze bore into her. "Miss Dawson has repeatedly disrupted these proceedings with unfounded claims," Judge Montgomery declared. "This court has examined all relevant evidence and found Thomas Dawson guilty of armed robbery. Miss Dawson is now under arrest for contempt." "Then I request to see that evidence myself, Your Honor," Wyatt said, stepping closer. "The lady deserves a fair hearing." "You have no standing in this court, Mr. Evans," the judge snapped. Pearl felt the bailiff's hand close around her arm, but she refused to be silenced. "My brother is innocent. You refuse to consider evidence that doesn't support your decision." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Montgomery slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Order, I will have order. Miss Dawson, you are hereby charged with contempt of court. You will spend 30 days in the county jail." As the bailiff began pulling Pearl toward the door, Wyatt moved forward again. "If she's to be tried for contempt, Your Honor, then I'll stand trial beside her." The courtroom fell silent. Pearl's wide eyes met Wyatt's steady gaze, a question in her expression. "Mr. Evans," the judge said slowly, his voice dangerously low, "are you interfering with this court's proceedings?" "No, Your Honor," Wyatt replied, his stance relaxed but resolute. "I'm merely suggesting that when a citizen brings forth evidence, it deserves consideration. If Miss Dawson is to be charged with contempt for presenting evidence, then I stand with her." Sheriff Harmon moved toward Wyatt, hand resting on his holstered gun. "You want to join her in a cell, Cowboy?" Wyatt didn't flinch. "If that's where justice is being served today, then yes." Pearl couldn't believe what she was hearing. This stranger, this cowboy, was risking imprisonment for her cause. The bailiff's grip on her arm tightened painfully. "Your Honor," came another voice from the gallery. Pearl recognized Charles Whitley, the town's newspaper editor, rising to his feet. The Spokane Gazette would be most interested in reporting how evidence was dismissed without examination in your courtroom. More murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Montgomery's face contorted with frustration before he finally waved his hand. Very well. Approach the bench with this supposed evidence, Miss Dawson. The bailiff released her arm and Pearl walked forward, her legs trembling beneath her skirts. She placed the telegram on the judge's bench, watching his eyes scan the paper. This proves nothing, he declared after a moment. Anyone could have sent this telegram. Your Honor, Wyatt said, moving to stand beside Pearl, a simple verification with the telegraph operator in Colville would confirm its authenticity. Judge Montgomery glared at Wyatt. Mr. Evans, you are treading on thin ice. Perhaps, Wyatt agreed, but I believe justice is worth the risk. For nearly a minute, the judge stared at them both, his fingers drumming against the wooden bench. Finally, he sighed heavily. Court will recess for 1 hour while this telegram is verified. Sheriff, send a wire to Colville immediately. Miss Dawson, you will remain in custody until this matter is resolved. As the bailiff took Pearl's arm again, Wyatt caught her eye. Don't worry, Miss Dawson, truth has a way of coming to light. Pearl couldn't stop the tears that welled in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered as she was led away. An hour later, the courtroom had filled to capacity, word having spread through Spokane about the confrontation. Pearl was brought back in, her wrists now unbound but her cheeks pale with worry. Judge Montgomery entered, his expression unreadable as he took his seat. The sheriff stood nearby, holding a newly received telegram. The court has verified with the telegraph operator in Colville that Thomas Dawson was indeed present there at the time of the robbery, the judge announced, his voice tight with reluctance. In light of this evidence, the charges against Thomas Dawson are dismissed. A cheer erupted from the back of the room where Thomas's friends had gathered. Pearl's knees nearly buckled with relief. However, the judge continued, silencing the celebration, Miss Dawson's behavior in this courtroom was unacceptable. The contempt charge stands, 1 week in county jail. Your Honor, Wyatt protested, stepping forward again. Would you care to join her, Mr. Evans? The judge asked coldly. Wyatt stood his ground. If that's your ruling, then yes. I said I'd stand trial beside her, and I meant it. Pearl shook her head frantically. No, please, you've done enough. This is my burden. A shared burden is lighter, Miss Dawson, Wyatt replied, never taking his eyes off the judge. Judge Montgomery's nostrils flared with anger. Your contempt for this court is noted, Mr. Evans. You'll have 1 week in county jail to consider your disrespect for the law. As the courtroom emptied, Pearl and Wyatt were led to the small jailhouse behind the courthouse. They were placed in separate cells across from each other, the iron bars between them a physical manifestation of the strange connection they'd formed in just 1 hour. Why did you do that? Pearl asked when the sheriff had left them alone. You don't know me. You don't know my brother. Wyatt sat on the narrow cot, his hat resting on his knee. My pa always said there are moments that define a man. Standing by while injustice happens, that's not the man I aim to be. Pearl studied him, this mysterious cowboy with principles stronger than his sense of self-preservation. You're facing a week in jail for a stranger. A week passes quickly, Wyatt said with a small smile, and you're not quite a stranger anymore, Miss Dawson. Pearl, she corrected him softly. My name is Pearl. Pearl, he repeated, the name sounding like something precious on his tongue. A fitting name for something of rare value. Despite their circumstances, a warmth blossomed in Pearl's chest. Tell me about yourself, Mr. Evans. What brings a Montana cowboy to Spokane? Wyatt, please, he replied. And it's a long story. We've got a week, might as well share it. As afternoon faded to evening, Pearl and Wyatt talked across the narrow jailhouse corridor. She learned he was 26, had worked cattle since he was 14, and had come to Washington Territory seeking new opportunities after a drought had devastated his employer's ranch in Montana. In turn, she told him about growing up in Spokane with her brother Thomas after their parents died of influenza, about running the small dress shop that barely kept them fed, and about her brother's dreams of starting his own freight business. He's all I have, she explained, her fingers curling around the iron bars. I couldn't let him hang for something he didn't do. "You're braver than most men I've known," Wyatt said, admiration clear in his voice. Thomas Dawson arrived the next morning, carrying bundles for both Pearl and, surprisingly, Wyatt. "Clean clothes," he explained, passing them through the bars, "and some decent food. Miss Leary from the boarding house sent it when she heard what happened." "How are you, Thomas?" Pearl asked, reaching through the bars to clasp her brother's hand. "Better than yesterday," he answered with a grin. "Not every day a man walks away from the gallows." He turned to Wyatt, extending his hand through the bars. "I owe you my life, Mr. Evans. My sister told me what you did." Wyatt shook his hand firmly. "Any decent man would have done the same." Thomas's expression sobered. "We both know that's not true. There were 30 people in that courtroom before you spoke up. Not one of them said a word." "I've arranged for Miss Leary to look after the shop while you're here," Thomas continued, addressing Pearl. "And Mr. Evans, I've spoken with Harris at the Diamond H Ranch. They're still looking for experienced hands, and he's willing to hold a position for you." Wyatt nodded gratefully. "That's mighty kind of you." After Thomas left, Sheriff Harmon allowed Pearl and Wyatt to sit in the small common area of the jailhouse for meals, under his watchful eye. Over a surprisingly palatable stew, Pearl studied Wyatt's face in the better light. His features were strong, a straight nose, firm jaw dusted with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer sky. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, and when she asked about it, he laughed. "First bronch I ever tried to break. Horse won that round." "Yet you kept riding," Pearl observed. "Getting thrown is part of learning," Wyatt said, breaking off a piece of bread. "It's getting back on that matters." Sheriff Harmon cleared his throat. "Don't get too comfortable. Back to your cells after eating." The days passed in a rhythm of conversation and shared meals. Pearl discovered that Wyatt was well-read despite his limited formal education, having taught himself from books borrowed from various ranch owners' libraries. He could quote Shakespeare and discuss the politics reported in newspapers that made their way to remote ranches. On the fourth day, as rain drummed against the jailhouse roof, Wyatt told Pearl about his family. "My mother died when I was 8. Pa raised me and my sister alone. He was a good man, tough but fair, taught me to stand for what's right, even when it's hard." "Where is he now?" Pearl asked. Wyatt's expression clouded. "Died 3 years ago. My sister married a shopkeeper in Helena. I write when I can, visit when work allows." "And you've never settled in one place?" Pearl wondered. Wyatt's fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "Never found a reason strong enough to stop moving." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Pearl felt her cheeks warm, and she looked away first. "What will you do after this?" she asked, gesturing to their surroundings. "Take that job at Diamond H, I reckon," Wyatt replied. "And you, back to the dress shop," Pearl nodded. "It's not much, but it's mine. With Thomas free, maybe things will get easier." On the 5th night, Pearl woke to the sound of shouting. Fires burned bright enough to cast dancing shadows through the small jailhouse window. She rushed to the bars, trying to see what was happening. "Fire," she called to Wyatt, who was already on his feet. "I think it's coming from the east side of town." The sheriff burst in moments later, keys jingling in his hands. "Finch's lumber mill is burning. I'm deputizing you both to help with the bucket line. Try to run, and I'll add another month to your sentence." Released from their cells, Pearl and Wyatt followed the sheriff toward the orange glow illuminating the night sky. The lumber mill was engulfed in flames, sparks flying dangerously toward neighboring buildings. Women and children on the near pump. Someone was shouting. "Strong backs on the line to the river." Pearl found herself passing buckets alongside other women, her arms aching with the effort, but her spirit determined. Wyatt had joined the men, forming a line down to the river, his shirt soon soaked with water and sweat as he worked. For hours they fought the blaze, until finally the first light of dawn revealed the smoking ruins of the mill. Miraculously, they'd managed to save the surrounding buildings. Exhausted, covered in soot and grime, Pearl sat on a fallen log, catching her breath. Wyatt appeared beside her, offering a cup of water from a nearby barrel. "You worked like 10 women tonight," he said, admiration clear in his voice. "And you like 20 men," she replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Their fingers brushed, sending a current of awareness through her tired body. Before either could say more, Sheriff Harmon approached. "Judge wants to see you both." Now, exchanging concerned glances, they followed the sheriff to the courthouse, where Judge Montgomery waited in his chambers, looking as if he hadn't slept either. "Sheriff Harmon has informed me of your assistance with the fire," the judge said without preamble. "The town council has requested I commute the remainder of your sentences in light of your service." Pearl's heart leapt, but the judge wasn't finished. "However, I find your disrespect for this court troubling." He fixed Wyatt with a stern look. "Especially yours, Mr. Evans. You're not even a resident of this town, yet you saw fit to challenge my authority." "With respect, Your Honor," Wyatt replied evenly, "I challenged an injustice, not your authority." The judge's eyes narrowed, but after a moment he sighed. "You're both free to go, but Miss Dawson, should you ever disrupt my courtroom again, the consequences will be far more severe." Released into the bright morning, Pearl felt strangely disoriented. After 5 days confined together, walking away from Wyatt seemed wrong somehow. "I suppose this is goodbye," she said, hating how her voice caught on the words. Wyatt looked at her, his face sooty but his eyes bright. "Actually, I was hoping I might call on you properly. Perhaps Sunday after church." A smile bloomed across Pearl's face. "I'd like that very much." True to his word, Wyatt appeared at the small church that Sunday, wearing a clean shirt and his least worn pair of pants. Pearl felt her heart flutter when she saw him waiting outside after the service, hat in hand. They walked through town, stopping at the small park near the river. Pearl was conscious of the curious glances from townspeople, the whispers that followed them. Their story had spread quickly. "Does it bother you?" she asked Wyatt. "The talk," he shrugged, his shoulder brushing against hers. "People will always talk, can't let it dictate how you live." Over the following weeks, Wyatt became a regular visitor to Pearl's dress shop. He'd stop by after his long days at the Diamond H Ranch, sometimes bringing wildflowers he'd gathered on the ride into town, other times just bringing stories that made her laugh. Pearl found herself looking forward to the sound of his boots on the wooden sidewalk, the jingle of his spurs as he entered her shop. Their friendship deepened, though neither had put a name to the growing feelings between them. One evening in late May, as they walked along the river after sharing a meal at the town's small restaurant, Wyatt seemed unusually quiet. "Is something wrong?" Pearl asked, concerned by his silence. Wyatt stopped walking, turning to face her in the golden light of sunset. "I've been offered a position as foreman at a ranch near Walla Walla." Pearl felt her heart sink. "That's wonderful news," she managed to say. "When would you leave?" "I haven't accepted yet," he replied, his eyes searching hers. "I told them I needed time to consider." "Why?" Pearl asked, though something in her already knew the answer. Wyatt took her hands in his touch sending warmth spreading through her despite the evening chill. "Because in these past weeks, I've found something I've never had before, a reason to stay in one place." Pearl's breath caught in her throat. "And what reason is that?" "You," he said simply. "I find myself thinking about you during the day, dreaming about you at night. I wonder if you might feel the same." Pearl's heart soared. "I do," she whispered. "I've never felt this way about anyone." Wyatt's face lit up with a smile that outshone the setting sun. Slowly, he leaned forward, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Pearl rose on her tiptoes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, a tender exploration that deepened as Pearl's hands moved to Wyatt's shoulders, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I'm turning down that job in Walla Walla." "Are you certain?" Pearl asked. "Being a foreman is a good opportunity." "There will be other opportunities," Wyatt assured her, "but there's only one Pearl Dawson." Summer bloomed across the landscape, and with it, Wyatt and Pearl's courtship flourished. He proved himself a valuable hand at the Diamond H, while Pearl's dress shop saw increased business as the town grew. They found moments to be together, despite their busy lives. Sunday afternoons by the river, Wednesday evening walks after Pearl closed her shop, stolen moments whenever possible. It was during one of these Wednesday walks in late July that they encountered Judge Montgomery outside the town's only hotel. The judge had aged in the months since their confrontation, his face more lined, his shoulders slightly stooped. "Miss Dawson, Mr. Evans," he greeted them stiffly. "Your Honor," they replied in unison, nodding respectfully. The judge hesitated, then said, "I understand congratulations are in order. The sheriff mentioned you two have been keeping company." "Yes, sir," Wyatt confirmed, his hand finding pearls. "Well," the judge said, clearing his throat awkwardly, "I suppose some good came of that unfortunate business after all." As he walked away, Pearl squeezed Wyatt's hand. "Did Judge Montgomery just give us his blessing?" Wyatt chuckled. "I believe he did in his own way." The encounter left Pearl thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it? Standing up in that courtroom?" Wyatt stopped walking, turning to face her in the golden evening light. "Not for a single moment. It led me to you." His kiss sealed the truth of his words, leaving Pearl breathless and certain that fate had brought them together for a reason. August brought sweltering heat and news that changed everything. Judge Montgomery suffered a stroke during court proceedings and died 2 days later. The town was thrown into a somber mood as preparations were made for his funeral. "Will you attend?" Wyatt asked Pearl the evening before the service. Pearl nodded slowly. Despite everything, he was still a man who served this town for 20 years, and in the end, he did release my brother. "Only after being forced to," Wyatt reminded her gently. "True," Pearl conceded. "But we all have our failings. In his final months, he seemed different, softer somehow." The funeral was well attended, the entire town turning out to bid farewell to the stern judge who had presided over Spokane's legal matters for 2 decades. As Pearl and Wyatt stood at the back of the crowd, a slender woman in black approached them. "Miss Dawson, Mr. Evans?" she asked softly. "I'm Margaret Montgomery, the judge's daughter," Pearl nodded politely. "Please accept our condolences for your loss." "Thank you," Margaret replied. "I wanted to meet you both. My father wrote to me about you in his letters. He said you taught him his most important lesson in his final years on the bench." Wyatt's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What lesson was that, madam?" "That justice requires courage, not just from those who enforce it, but from those who demand it." Margaret's eyes welled with tears. "He wasn't always an easy man, but your stand made him reconsider many things. His letter mentioned he'd been reviewing old cases, trying to right any wrongs before." She trailed off, composing herself. "Anyway, I thought you should know." As Margaret moved away to receive condolences from others, Wyatt and Pearl exchanged a meaningful look. The judge's revelation added a layer of complexity to their feelings about that pivotal day in court. "Perhaps we were too harsh in our judgment of him," Pearl said quietly. Wyatt placed his arm around her shoulders. "We're all capable of change, I reckon. That's what gives me hope for this world." September brought cooler temperatures and an important decision. Wyatt had saved enough money to make a down payment on a small homestead just outside of town, fertile land with a creek running through it, perfect for raising cattle and horses. "It needs work," he admitted as he showed Pearl the property one crisp afternoon. The cabin was solid but simple, the barn in need of repair. But it could be something special with time and effort. Pearl turned slowly, taking in the golden fields, the distant mountains, the clear blue sky overhead. "It's beautiful, Wyatt." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I didn't want to presume, but I wondered if you might consider sharing it with me, as my wife." Pearl's heart skipped a beat. "Are you proposing, Wyatt Evans?" "Not very well, apparently," he said with a self-conscious laugh before dropping to one knee. "Pearl Dawson, you've brought light and purpose to my life. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Pearl whispered, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Yes, I will marry you." He rose and swept her into his arms, their kiss sealing the promise between them. News of their engagement spread quickly through Spokane. Thomas was the first to congratulate them, embracing his future brother-in-law with genuine affection. "You saved my life," he told Wyatt. "Now you're making my sister happier than I've ever seen her. I couldn't ask for a better man to join our family." The wedding was set for October, when the autumn colors would be at their peak. Pearl worked tirelessly on her wedding dress, creating something far more elaborate than anything she'd made before. Wyatt, meanwhile, focused on making the cabin habitable, with help from Thomas and friends from the Diamond H. 2 weeks before the wedding, trouble arrived in the form of Edgar Finch, the wealthy lumber mill owner whose robbery had nearly sent Thomas to the gallows. His mill rebuilt after the fire, Finch had maintained a grudge against the Dawsons, convinced despite all evidence that Thomas had been involved in the crime. When Finch learned of Pearl's engagement, he saw an opportunity for revenge. He approached the bank that held the mortgage on Pearl's dress shop, offering to buy the loan at a premium. Once in possession of the note, he immediately called it due in full, an impossible sum for Pearl to produce on short notice. "He's trying to ruin me," Pearl said, her voice trembling as she showed Wyatt the demand letter. "If I lose the shop, I lose everything I've built." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "How much time do we have?" 10 days, Pearl replied, sinking into a chair. "He knows I can't raise that kind of money so quickly." Wyatt knelt beside her. "We'll figure this out, I promise you." That evening, they gathered with Thomas at his small apartment above the livery stable where he worked. As they discussed options, a knock came at the door. Thomas opened it to reveal Sheriff Harmon, looking uncomfortable in the doorway. "Evening, folks. Sorry to intrude, but I thought you should know Finch is spreading some ugly rumors around town." "What kind of rumors?" Pearl asked, her stomach clenching with dread. The sheriff sighed. "He's saying Thomas wasn't really innocent, that you two cooked up that telegram evidence together. And he's suggesting that your relationship with Wyatt began improperly during your time in jail." Pearl gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's despicable." "It's also slander," Wyatt said firmly. "Sheriff, isn't there anything to be done?" Sheriff Harmon shook his head. "Legally, not much, but I wanted you to know what you're facing. Finch has influence in this town." After the sheriff left, Wyatt paced the small room. "We need to fight back. Not with fists, but with truth." "How?" Thomas asked, his expression grim. "The newspaper," Wyatt replied. "Charles Whitley stood up in that courtroom too. Maybe he'll help us now." The following morning, they visited the Spokane Gazette offices. Whitley, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes, listened intently to their story. "Finch is an advertiser," he said when they finished, "but he's also a bully. I've been looking for a reason to put him in his place." He tapped his pen against his desk thoughtfully. "I can publish the facts about what happened in court, including the verification of the telegram, but we need more to counter his current actions." "Like what?" Pearl asked. Whitley smiled. "Like proof of who actually robbed him. The real culprit was never caught, was he?" The three exchanged glances. "No," Thomas confirmed. "The case was closed after I was released." "Then perhaps it's time to reopen it unofficially," Whitley suggested. "Give me a few days." While they waited for Whitley's investigation, Wyatt approached the bank manager directly, requesting an extension on Pearl's loan. The manager, a reasonable man named Anderson, was sympathetic but constrained. "Finch owns the note now," he explained. "There's nothing I can do officially, but—" He lowered his voice. "I could delay the paperwork. Give you a few extra days, perhaps." On the 7th day, with only 3 days remaining before Finch could legally seize the dress shop, Whitley sent word asking them to meet him urgently. They found him in his office, excitement evident in his expression. "I have it," he announced, pointing to several sheets of notes on his desk. "Finch's former foreman, James Hickley, was the one who robbed the mill safe. He skipped town afterward, but he's been writing to his sister here. She showed me his letters after I convinced her it could help clear an innocent man's name." Pearl gasped. "Hickley, but he testified against Thomas at the trial to divert suspicion from himself," Whitley explained. "And Finch believed him because he wanted to. They were close, too close, according to some accounts. I suspect Finch might have known the truth but protected Hickley even after he fled." "Will Hickley's sister go public with the letters?" Wyatt asked. Whitley nodded. "She's agreed to let me quote portions that relate to the robbery. I'm running the story in tomorrow's edition." The next morning, the Spokane Gazette's headline read, "Justice Delayed, True Culprit in Finch Robbery Revealed." The article methodically laid out the evidence against Hickley, including damning excerpts from his letters where he bragged about pulling one over on the old man and having enough money to start fresh in California. The story also recounted Pearl and Wyatt's courtroom stand, Judge Montgomery's eventual verification of the telegram, and Finch's recent attempts to financially ruin the Dawson family despite knowing the truth about his former foreman. By noon, it seemed the entire town had read the article. People stopped Pearl on the street to offer support. Several of her customers made a point of placing new orders, paying in advance to help her financial situation. Finch, meanwhile, found himself facing uncomfortable questions. By evening, he had retreated to his mansion on the hill, refusing to speak with anyone. The following day brought another surprise. Anderson from the bank visited Pearl's shop, carrying a leather folder. "Miss Dawson," he began formally, "I've been authorized to inform you that your loan has been purchased from Mr. Finch by a consortium of local businessmen. They've agreed to return to the original payment schedule." Pearl blinked in astonishment. "Who would do such a thing?" Anderson smiled. Several people contributed, but the idea came from Mrs. Montgomery, the judge's widow. She said it was what her husband would have wanted to ensure justice was truly served. Tears welled in Pearl's eyes. "Please convey my deepest gratitude." With the immediate threat removed, wedding preparations resumed in earnest. The community rallied around the couple, offering help and gifts. Mrs. Leary from the boarding house volunteered to bake the wedding cake, while the ladies from Pearl's sewing circle presented her with a handmade quilt for her new home. The day before the wedding, Thomas approached Wyatt as they finished the final repairs to the cabin roof. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small package from his saddlebag. "It belonged to our father." Wyatt unwrapped the cloth to reveal a beautifully crafted pocket watch, silver with intricate engravings. "Thomas, I can't accept this. It should stay in your family." Thomas smiled. "You are family now. Besides, my father always said this watch should go to the man who would take care of his little girl. That's you." Deeply moved, Wyatt clasped his future brother-in-law's shoulder. "I'll treasure it, and I promise to take care of her always." The wedding day dawned crisp and clear, the October sun casting a golden glow over Spokane. The small church was filled to capacity with friends, neighbors, and even a few curious onlookers drawn by the now famous story of the defiant woman and the cowboy who stood beside her. Pearl wore her creation, an ivory dress with delicate lace trim and tiny pearl buttons down the back. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in an elegant twist, adorned with white rosebuds. As she walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm, her eyes locked with Wyatt's, finding in them all the love and promise she'd ever hoped for. Wyatt stood tall in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. The moment Pearl appeared, his breath caught in his throat. She was radiant, the embodiment of everything good and true in his life. The minister spoke of commitment, of standing together through trials and joys, words that held special meaning for this couple who had already proven their willingness to face adversity side by side. When they exchanged vows, Wyatt's voice rang clear and certain. "I, Wyatt Evans, take you, Pearl Dawson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to stand beside you always, in good times and bad, in freedom and in trial, until death parts us." Pearl's eyes shimmered with tears as she repeated similar words, adding her own promise. "I will face whatever comes our way with the same courage you showed when you stood up for justice and for me." Their kiss as husband and wife was met with enthusiastic applause, the congregation celebrating not just a marriage but the triumph of love and integrity over adversity. The reception was held in the town square, transformed by lanterns and autumn flowers into a festive gathering space. Music from fiddles and guitars filled the air as people danced and celebrated. Even Sheriff Harmon joined the festivities, offering a toast to the most determined woman and the most principled cowboy I've ever had the pleasure to arrest. As evening approached, Pearl and Wyatt slipped away from the celebration, riding in a decorated wagon to their new home. The cabin welcomed them with the warm glow of oil lamps that Thomas had thoughtfully lit before returning to the party. Standing in the doorway of their home, Wyatt swept Pearl into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Evans," she laughed as he carried her across the threshold. "I love the sound of that." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Pearl traced the line of Wyatt's jaw with her fingertips. "Did you ever imagine that day in the courtroom that we would end up here?" Wyatt captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Not specifically, but I knew from the moment I saw you stand up to that judge that you were someone extraordinary, someone worth knowing, worth following, worth loving. And I knew when you stood beside me that you were a man unlike any other, Pearl whispered. My very own hero. Not a hero, Wyatt corrected gently. Just a man who couldn't bear to see injustice done, especially to the woman who would become the love of his life. Spring came to their homestead, bringing new life and new beginnings. Pearl had established a smaller dressmaking business from their home, specializing in wedding gowns inspired by her own. Wyatt had built up a respectable herd of cattle, supplemented by 3 fine horses he was training for sale. Thomas visited often, bringing news from town. Edgar Finch had sold his lumber mill and left Spokane, his reputation never recovering from the revelations about the robbery. A new judge had been appointed, a younger man with a reputation for fairness. One warm May afternoon, as Pearl and Wyatt sat on their porch watching the sunset, she placed his hand on her slightly rounded belly. Life takes unexpected turns, doesn't it? She mused. If my brother hadn't been falsely accused, if I hadn't defied that judge, if you hadn't been in that courtroom that day. But you did, and I was, Wyatt finished, his eyes filled with wonder as he felt the new life growing within her. Sometimes justice and love are found in the same moment. Pearl leaned against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that their child would be born into a home built on courage, integrity, and an unshakable love that began with 2 people willing to stand together, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Our child will know the story, she promised. How his father was the cowboy brave enough to say, I'll stand trial beside her. Wyatt kissed her tenderly, and how his mother's courage changed not just our lives but this entire town. As darkness settled over their land, they remained on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts beating as one, a testament to the power of standing together for what's right, and the love that can blossom when 2 souls recognize their match in the most unexpected circumstances.